The following program was produced by the Theosophical Society in America.
You're very interesting. You know that? I mean, this is always true of theosophists and theosophically minded people, because you have bridged, divided, and distinguished worlds. But I'm looking at you, and you're very interesting. I rarely see such an interesting audience. You really look, and some of the truly unusual things people have been saying to me. I mean, you remind me of a marvelous Jewish story about Mrs. Rosenberg, who goes to her travel agent and says, "Listen, this year I don't want to go to Israel. I don't want to go to the south of France. This year I want to go see the Swami of the year, Swami Ananda." He says, "Mrs. Rosenberg, have you any idea what's involved? You have to take at least 5 or 6 planes. You take a broken down bus. You have to take an ox cart over the Himalayas. No, you don't want to do that." "Yes, darling, that's what I want to do." So she takes a plane from Miami to New York, and then from New York to Paris, and Paris to Athens, and Athens to Delhi, and Delhi to Kathmandu. And she gets on a broken down bus, and then she gets on this awful ox cart that she has to help push, through the Himalayas. And then she's online. No, she walks for 6 weeks, and then she's online for another 6 weeks to get to the entrance to the cave of the great Swami Ananda. And finally she gets up there, and this little man all in yellow saffron and Bindu comes up, and he says, "You realize, of course, you can have only 3 words with the great Swami Ananda." She says, "3 words, darling, that's all I need, it's all right." She goes in, and there he is, this beautiful Swami, coils of black hair, his eyes rolled up in his head in samadhi. And she leans over and she says, "Morris, come home." I tell you this story because you look like Morris to me. People who've done very different things in their lives than perhaps what would normally have been expected. How many of you can actually say that? You've done different things in your lives that would normally be expected. Oh, friends, we are a very, very fortunate group of people, because we have an extraordinary reason for being on Earth in this totally open moment of the planet's history. In fact, there are various indigenous people who believe that in the next 5 to 10 years, we are actually entering into a singularity of history. How many of you are aware of that? I mean, from the 2012 to other cultures also predicting things around this time. But this open moment, these early years of the millennium, and I really truly believe that our job, our holy task, our great privilege is to bring about peace. A peace that is so rich and so full of flavor that it makes sense to make peace. To shift the dangerous and fearful and war-embracing patterns of the centuries and offer a rich and evocative alternative. I sometimes find myself as a guest on the radio through the phone very late at night. And around 2 o'clock in the morning, if you're still on the radio, you find that your mouth keeps going, but you've actually fallen asleep. And then people call you up to tell you, "Do you know what you said?" And evidently I said that our concepts of peace were much too tame, they were boring. that peace should be alluring, fascinating, evocative, challenging. And evidently, in my sleep state, I said, peace should be sexy. Well, several days later, a very interesting Greenwich Village poet, who was very elderly, called me up and he said, Miss Houston, I certainly liked what you said about making peace sexy, so I wrote you a poem about it. And he wrote me this extraordinary poem that is actually in one of our quest books, a Manual of the Peacemaker, and this is it. Peace is not sterile gauze, a snowflake, an insipid dove. It's feisty and rich. Don't let the world boys hog it all, the spit, the spice, and the glamour. Peace is potency, reaching and sprouting, budding and branching. It's lifting things. A good scrap, a hot wrestle, and a cool scrub, cleansing and hope. Peace is the empowerment of dust. Whispers of the song before origin as out of seed, the cathedral of the body builds itself. Its spasms and metamorphoses. The vertigo of mind dancing with the fecundator to the music of need. Peace is little orange bees, spotted ladybugs on white campions, late June with a stink of linden, prickles, and burrs. It's wild grapes in a bramble, a tough nut, lovers churning through the night at moon. In the morning, a juicy comeuppance for the grim suppressors. Peace is for the star-biters and the rooted. Don't be dainty, go at it, hammer and tongue. Peace is not purity, limp, neat, and dry. It's sexy. So friends, it is a dynamic, green, growing, sap, rising concept, this peacemaking. And you know when it works, it really renews both individuals and communities. I mean, what the world so desperately needs now at this time is patterns for peaceful, passionately creative and effective societies. And with it, peaceful, passionately creative and effective people. In other words, the possible human and the possible society. So look, Morris, all you Morrises there, just consider why you're here. You're here because you have to be. You're here because the 13.7 billion year experiment that has resulted finally in your life could readily come to an end within this century. You're here because you're present at the birth of an opportunity that exceeds our imagination. The wonderful English poet and playwright Christopher Fry says, "Thank God our time is now, when wrong comes up to meet us everywhere, never to leave us, till we take the longest stride of soul folk ever took." And so many of you, friends, are called to take initiatives that in fairly recent years would have seemed unlikely, if not downright impossible, but now the world has been rearranged. The reset button of history has been hit. You no longer have the luxury of sloth. But what to do, where to go, how to take initiative, and what is key here? How to understand your role as leader, evocateur, midwife of souls, and social artist in this, the most compelling moment in human history. I realized that other times in history thought they were it. They're wrong. This is it. Because we are the ones who have the most profound task in human history, the task of deciding whether we grow or whether we die. Now, at one level, this will involve helping cultures and organizations to move from dominance by one economic culture or group to circular investedness, sharing, partnership. It will involve putting economics back as a satellite to the soul of culture instead of having the soul of culture as a satellite to economics. It will involve deep listening, past the arias and habits of cruelty of crushed and humiliated people. It will involve absolutely, as Ed Tick spoke of so luminously, deep caring for our warriors and our veterans. It will involve a stride of soul that will challenge the very canons of the human condition. It will require that we become evolutionary partners of each other. Oh, friends, I mean, there's just no question. We have an opportunity to play a role in the greatest transition drama the world has ever seen. And the time we are in right now, I believe, is the great either-or of history. We're the people of the parenthesis, aren't we? We're at the end of one era. We're not quite at the beginning of the new one. Many people withdraw from the onslaught of the too muchness. People become workaholics, or find numbing solace in addiction, or hours staring at the television. Too many agree to live a life of serial monotony and the progressive dimming of our passions for life. But many, many, all of you in this room, are trying to understand the momentous opportunity that is ours. We are, as I said, among the most important people who have ever lived, because we are the ones who are going to determine whether humankind will die or perish, evolve or perish. So how do we prepare ourselves for such time? How do we prepare ourselves for the responsibility, not just for the personal, but also for the planetary process? What qualities of mind, of body, of spirit can overcome the limitations we all feel? How do we go about preparing ourselves to become the stewards of the planet, filled with enough passion for the possible to partner one another through the greatest social transformation ever known? And regardless of how unfulfilled we may seem, regardless of how meager our self-esteem, we are called into greatness by the necessity of our age. And we have little choice but to say yes. Now you may say this is an impossible task. We all feel absolutely inadequate when it comes to anything to stop the flood of world-destroying problems or to growing beyond our personal limitations. But then I remember, as you do, the picture of that Earth from outer space, yes? So many of the Earth's people seeing that picture of our planet floating in space, something very deep was activated in the human spirit. Because suddenly we realized that we were part of a much larger unity of life, of peoples. We began to cherish the whole planet, not just our particular part or nation. We began to understand that one part of the world can no longer dominate the others through economic or military strength. Now, in the midst of all this turmoil, absolutely unique factors in history have arisen. I mean, we are glimpsing, I do believe, in this century, the coming of a planetary society, a planetary civilization with high individuation of culture, which hopefully, heralds the end of ancient enmities and the birth of new ways of using our common humanity in various cultures. In fact, we're going to need the genius of the whole human race if we're going to survive. Some of you know that I was the adopted daughter of Margaret Mead. I had a wonderful mother. She had a lovely daughter, but she said, I need another daughter, so that's probably you, you know. And she lived with us often on the last 6 years of her life. And she sent me out. She said, Jean, go out and harvest the human potential. Now, by that point, I'd been doing a lot of work in studying human development, but I hadn't worked cross-culturally. So she would send me to a tribe in West Africa that had almost no history of warfare and had very little neurosis as we understand it. And I remember meeting with the elder of the tribe, whose name was Kwame. And Kwame said, you know, I was abducted by the Jesuits. And I was trained in that way, and I knew it was wrong, and I ran away, and I came back to my society because I knew we did things better. Well, how? He says, well, let me show you. We have a big problem now about sanitation. We're trying to solve the problem. So you watch. Everybody's holding the image of what we can do. And then the drumming began. And then everybody drum for me. Everybody drum. Drum began. No, drumming. African drumming. And the singing began. Hey, yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, yeah, yeah. Hey, yeah, yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. And the drumming continued. And then everybody got up. And the dancing, the chicken dance. Hey, yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then they would close their eyes and they would dream it and they would vision it and they would dance it and they would drum it some more and then they'd all have the solution. Now what were they doing? They were cooking on more burners. They were using much, much more of themselves. Yes? That's what they were doing. She sends me to Bali. Jean, that's the way she talked. Find out why all these people are such extraordinary artists in Bali. Why were they such tremendous artists? And I found out. They would enter into slightly altered states. They would become one with the thing that they were drawing, or painting, or mask making. And then the great artist would take his hands and place them over yours and guide you in the carving of whatever you were doing. So it was an extraordinary learning at a different level. And I discovered that the genius of the human race, for the first time in human history, can be harvested. And it doesn't have to do with one race having a certain talent the other does. It has to do with geography and climate. You go to the south of India and you find all these mathematicians and scientists. Why? The nature of the Carnatic music is a music that allows for a kind of shifting of planes of consciousness, of order and pattern, that then gives a genius for mathematics. We know so much about the human capacity, so much. So I have found that the challenges that arise in one culture can often be met by applying the strategies developed in the other. This is a tremendous change. And now that it is in full flower, the world will have turned a corner. Let me tell you something else. I know I'm not supposed to make political remarks, so I'm not going to make a political remark. I'll just tell you something, because I've traveled a lot this year, maybe 160,000 miles. And I'll tell you something that I'm seeing. Due to the fact that America has been demythologized over the last few years because of the current administration, many cultures that I have visited are beginning to tap back into the genius, authenticity, beauty, and creativity of their own culture, because they are no longer morally dependent on America. Isn't that interesting? So it's almost like the regaining of the depths of culture and weaving this together as we begin to move into a planetary civilization. It's fascinating. As for the human potential, look, Morris, we are coded with potentials that few of us ever learn to use. But in a time like ours, a time of whole system transition, we can no longer afford to live as half-light versions of ourselves. The complexity of our time requires a greater, a larger, a deeper use of our capacities, a rich playing on the incredible instrument we have been given. The world can thrive only if we can grow. Thus we are able to learn to think, to feel, to know in new ways, to become more creative, more imaginative, to aspire within a realistic limit to a much larger awareness, one that is finally equipped to deal with the many challenges of modern life. And as I was listening to Mrs. Bland last night and to John Algeo, and listening to the great patterns of possibility that have been put forth in the Theosophical pattern, so many of these are absolutely correspondent with the need to shift, to extend our consciousness, our awareness in order to be of true service to the world. It's right consonant with all this. The present emerging ecology of minds, of psyche, our ability our availability to each other, to dream each other's dreams and experience each other's biography is part of the interpenetrating wave of current time, psyche, and memory. We are being rescaled to planetary proportions as we become resonant and intimate with our own depths. Because after all, friends, we live in a time in which the world mind is taking a walk with itself. The earth herself is becoming a vast teaching-learning community, a new order of democratic biology, as individuals and groups learn, as they participate and create together a whole new arena for personal and social evolution. Which brings me to the whole issue of human capacities and the social artist. You know, I have worked with leadership all over the world, from 2 US presidents and 3 first ladies to the man who was the head of his leper colony, leper in southern India. I mean, at every level. And I'm finding everywhere that part of our problem is leadership that is ill-prepared to deal with present complexity. All over the world, I'm finding leaders who, and it's a terrible thing to say, but it's as if they've been trained to be white males of the year 1926. They have not been trained for today's complexity. And so this is a lack of human resourcefulness. Leaders living out of a field of awareness that is both limited and limiting in their ability to deal with the world as it is today. And worldwide, societies are crying for assistance in the transformation of their citizens, their organizations, their institutions. But as I said, too many leaders have been educated, sadly, for a different time, for a different sensibility, a different world. And the world reflects this tragically. And so the usual formulas and stopgap solutions lead to chaos. For as Einstein reminded us, the consciousness that created the problem cannot be the same consciousness that solves it. And that's why I say, friends, that we are in grave need of social artists. We have to begin to help people to bring new mind to bear upon social change. Now, what is a social artist? The social artist is someone who is able to bring something of the focus, the passion, the complexity, the skill that an artist brings to his or her materials. But in this case, the material is the whole social canvas. And that's what I've been doing. I mean, from all these years of studying the human capacity and training people in human capacities, now what I'm doing is, actually nothing stops, I just add more things. But what I'm doing is training leadership all over the world. In the last few years, I've been working with the leaders in Albania, the island states of the Eastern Caribbean, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, the Philippines, Nepal. Just this year, I was working with leaders from 12 Asian countries in Kathmandu, and now this mandate, because this work has been very successful and effective, and I'm working with the leaders, the mayors of the great Asian cities, the huge Asian cities that have these immense problems. And evidently they found it effective, so now they've given me this mandate to train 10,000 people to do this work, who are expected then to train 100 million people in 10 years. Now, what is the social artist? The social artist is able to move between cultures with the ability to enter into each other's belief systems, cultural styles, energizing stories and rituals. They learn to be informed on world issues in the context of different cultures, not just from the point of view of a particular nation or policy. Now, in terms of human development, this requires high sensory development and what I will refer to as a polyphrenic nature. Now, so one of the things that I do is I train people to greatly refine and amplify their sensory equipment. Many, many techniques. And fine-tuning, of thinking in images as well as thinking in words, and above all, being able to tap into internal imageries. I once made a study, as some of you may know, of 55 of some of those creative people in North America, sustained creativity. Margaret Mead, of course. Joseph Campbell was a research subject, and he and I worked together for many years, about 20 years. Buckminster Fuller, whose last home that he ever designed, I live in now, in Ashland, Oregon, 2 dorms. Linus Pauling, Jonas Salk, and a lot of people whose names you wouldn't know, but had high sustained creativity. Really looked at things in radically new ways, used their dreams, used their images. They were all archaeologists of their own mind. They were spelunkers in the caves of their own creativity. You know, really fascinating the way they use their inner imagery. Margaret Mead was absolutely spectacular. You know, if she would run problems through her inner images. And she'd say, oh, now what about this? When I feel it, I touch it. No, it's not. No, forget. What about that? Yes, yes, yes. Oh, good. And she'd be energized by this gestalt of multiple touch, taste, feeling, seeing. And it was as if beneath the surface crust of consciousness, the creative ideas are rising up all the time, but you have to develop the hooks and eyes of the inner and outer images to be able to catch them. So by imagery, I'm not just referring to visual imagery. I'm talking about complex imagery on multiple levels, because the creative process seems to be going on all the time. And the difference between people who are able to access it and those who aren't is that they develop the neurological and the psychological tools to be able to catch these levels of images. It's a fascinating, fascinating phenomenon. So I train people how to do this, you see. And then we find that quite literally, they are bringing much more mind, intelligence, memory, acuity, and passion, because these images activate all kinds of hormonal energizers, neuronal enthusiasts, and they're also remapping their brain all the time. Very important book just came out, Norman Doidge's The Brain That Changes Itself. It's a radical new understanding about how literally we can restructure and recircuit our brains. And it's a phenomenal book. The Brain That Changes Itself, I recommend it to everybody. It's very exciting. But what he's doing with machines and things, we've been doing for many years without machines, and just using various, ways and gifts of consciousness. Polyphrenia. Some of you may have heard me say once that if schizophrenia, the split personality, is the disease of the human condition, then polyphrenia, the orchestration of our many, many, many selves, is our expanded health. Ego, friends, is too frail a craft to bear the burden of present complexity. Do you know? It just, we are not as my old friend Alan Watts used to say, we are not encapsulated bags of skin dragging around dreary little egos. We are organism environments, symbiotic with fields and persona in all of our lives. I use myself as an exemplum horriblum. I happen to hate to write. I hate it. Yeah. And my New Age friends used to say, and do you channel your books? I say, I fight for every damn word, But I did find a trick. And that is, I happen to have one of my own persona inside of me, which is a cook. And it's something I do very well. It's 2 things I do very well in this world. I can cook, and I can talk to any dog. Those are my talents. That's it. I was raised by a dog, but that's another story. Go read my book, Mystical Dogs, you'll find out all about it. But anyway, but as a cook, why am I such a good cook? Very good reason. My mother, Maria Annunziata Serafina Graziella Fiorina Perpetua Tidaro, who was born in Syracuse, Sicily, married Jack Houston of Texas. They did not understand each other's food at all. My father couldn't abide the presence of garlic. He called them stink buds. My mother lived by garlic. Anyway, to try to keep my family together at the age of 8, I became the world's first fusion cook making chicken fried polenta, you know, or things like that. But anyway, I happen to be a very good cook. As a cook, I have absolutely no blocks at all. Talk about galloping chutzpah. I mean, that's me as a cook, you know. And, you know, in 42 years of marriage, I have rarely repeated any dish for my husband except for a few old standards. We have something new every night because I love it. You know, fusion cuisine, and I mean, it's not as bad as that restaurant, that Jewish Chinese restaurant in San Francisco called the Genghis Khan, but you know, it's in the vicinity. All right, so as a cook, I have no blocks. I have no blocks. And when I start to think, oh God, I have to write, what I do is I drop Jean and I assume another persona, almost shamanically, of a cook. And I literally stir in ideas and associations, and the words become spices, and I think entirely as a cook, and I have no blocks. Now we all have, if I were to say to you, how many different personas do you have? You would probably, each one of you, give me 10 to 100, actually. Healer, meditator, mother, father, child, you might be a child, mystic, complete fool, clown. I mean, just think of them. But you can actually learn to bring these different persona forward. And they bring with them a gestalt of different qualities. And then you bring this persona with its gestalt of new qualities to bear upon things that you want to do. So we do that. One of the things that I do around these countries is I create some of the Native American Indian wheel, you know, where you would have the lawgiver, you would have the poet, you would have the, you know, the different, the justice, you would the athlete, the warrior, etc. And I have them look at a problem and take on the persona and then respond to a problem like gender inequality or HIV/AIDS or childhood mortality. And I have them look by being these different persona, you see. Increase the template of the persona, polyphrenia, you increase the template of the capacity to solve problems, you see. So that's one thing that we do. Now, the social artist is able to help people to work in collaborative networks and to move away from hierarchies and power structures. He or she is one who helps cultures and organizations move from patriarchy to partnership. And as I said earlier, from dominance by one economic cultural group to circular inventiveness, sharing, partnership. How many of you know that wonderful new little book? It's a tiny book. It's called The Starfish and the Spider. Any of you know it? It's a marvelous book. It's about how different organizations function. Many of the big corporations function as spiders. You have a center from which everything else is radiate. And if you cut off the head of the spider, it's all finished. Starfish, you can cut off a leg, it grows another, and things. Google is a starfish organization. Amazon.com is a starfish organization. Napster, I mean, so many interesting new organizations. The networkers, the bloggers, starfish organizations. So one of the things is that we help these different groups move from hierarchy and spider consciousness to starfish organizations. And this also then allows women to come in, because I'm going to say something, it's always taken very badly, but I'm going to tell you anyway, because I have the experience of seeing this. Who's making the biggest difference throughout the world? Women of a certain age. Women of a certain age, more or less the age of a lot of the women here. Because they just don't care anymore. They don't worry about getting trashed, you know. Mrs. Roosevelt, I knew her very well when I was about 15 because I was president of my high school, and she gathered all the young high school presidents to get us into it. She said, "My dear, you have to realize that as a professional woman, you can expect, you know, to be trashed." Trash wasn't the word she used, but be. And she said, "But please remember, my dear, that a woman is just like a tea bag. You put her in hot water and she just gets stronger." You know, so, anyway. But we find that, we really find that these women bringing along young men and women are the ones who have the galloping chutzpah, the energy and the perceptions to really make a difference. 75 to 80%. Nobody writes about that because it would not be popular. But the rise of women to full partnership with men may be the most important event of the last 5,000 years, because the emphasis is often on process rather than on product, making things relate, cohere, develop, grow. Now, additionally, the social artist is the one who presents a model for a constantly learning society. Many different kinds of learning, many kinds of learning. And this is something else that we do as social artists. We try to bring better schools into systems. I have done a certain amount of work, for which I did a lot of preparation in Bangladesh, where there was still the remnants of really not very good, bad British missionary education, which the Brits had abandoned a long time ago. And what we do is we put art back to the curriculum. I've never met a stupid child. I've met incredibly stupid systems of education, especially when they're Western imposed. And we find that if you put art back into the classroom, that the child is dancing and singing and emoting and drumming and acting and incarnating information, quite simply, they do not fail. And so we set up, in Bangladesh, we worked with 1,000 leaders, many of them educational leaders, and we taught them these different modalities of using the many frames of mind and the whole body and mind of the child, and bringing back the Bengali culture and that tremendous language. Bengal, as we heard this morning, is a very poor country and always, tortured by these floods, but it is also a culture of great poetry and music, of high and low theater, and of people who have an immense sense of gratitude. So it was not that difficult to really begin to help them. And you never impose from without. That's something else as a social artist. You might have a few ideas that you share, but you let the great ideas really come from the people. And we found that if we let happen, then the schools began to change. Actually, it happened in tens of thousands of schools in Bangladesh, but we do this in many countries. If you're going to have a sustaining, evolving society, you have to do something about the school systems. And interesting enough, we do find that in these developing countries, they are much more accepting of this work than they would be in the United States. Because they're not as shuttered, they are not as closed down. And they say things like, I feel like I've gotten my life back again. When I was taking this British education, I was like, my mouth was stopped, my eyes were shuttered, and now I have come alive. Now I have come alive. You hear this over and over again. The social artist tries to help members of a culture or organization to preserve the genius of the culture even as they move it into a new story. I'll give you an example of how we do this. So we arrive in February of 2004 in Albania. How many of you know about Albania? The poor man of Europe. They had been under the rulership of this dreadful person named Anvars Hoxha, who was a Stalinist, and who told them after World War II a whole bunch of lies, saying that Albania was considered to be the supreme kingdom, and everybody wanted it. So he built 900,000 round concrete bunkers and kept people essentially victimized and very poor. And when he died, he was followed by a succession of rotating bimbos and a Ponzi scheme. Well, they were just coming out of this, and well, they're actually a little further along than that, and so yearning, so wanting to be part of the European Union and to really find the life. Well, we arrived, and my working partner, somebody named Peggy Rubin. And Peggy Rubin was once one of the heads of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and was a great actor, great classical actor. And we arrive in Albania, in Tirana, and she falls on the ground and kisses the ground and says, "What country friend is this?" "This is Illyria, lady," because of course, Albania is ancient Illyria. You remember in Albania, you remember 12th night. And we go there, And I knew that we had to find a story. We had to find a story that would work. Because I find if you're really going to be effective as a social artist, you can't just give a series of techniques or strategies. Oh no. You have to find the unique story of the culture. And we found one. And this is the story. It seems that there was a beautiful kingdom with a wonderful queen and king and a lovely, lovely princess. And so we actually acted it out. And who was the princess? The princess is Albania, of course. And it was the kingdom before all the terrible things happened. And a demon sees the beautiful princess and abducts her and carries her under the earth. Well, of course, that's filled with all kinds of interesting ideas. Who is the demon in any particular society? And the bereft king and queen call for anyone to come forward and rescue the princess, and if she agrees, then they will marry. Now, immediately the Albanians, even though it was their own ancient story, said, why does it have to be a princess? Why can't it be a prince and have the women rescue? So you really see where they're going. Okay, but we stay within the story. 7 noble brothers come forward. And they each have unique capacities. The first noble brother can hear anything. He has acute senses. He has this incredible sense, and he hears the demon snoring under the earth. He's just there. The second noble brother can open the earth anywhere. And he goes, and indeed, he opens up the earth. The third noble brother can steal anything, can abstract the essence, and he's able to get the princess out of her chains, and they begin to carry them away. But the fourth noble brother sees the demon, the sleeping demon's magical shoe that allows him to travel great distances, and he gets it and he hurls it to the end of the earth. The fifth noble brother builds and can build an impregnable castle in moments where everybody hides. But of course the demon comes looking for his shoe, sees the castle, says, oh, please, 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 I don't need to take the princess, but let me just see her one last minute, please, just a little cheek. As they open up a cheek, whoop, and of course he's a shapeshifter, zoom, zoom, grabs the princess, goes flying off. But the sixth noble brother has the power of intentionality and focus, and is the world's greatest marksman, and he shoots the demon, who falls and probably goes to demon hospital. But the seventh noble brother, the youngest and handsomest, is able to catch the princess, and he's so lovely, and they live happily ever after. Classical story, what do we do with it? Well, you can see. First noble brother is who? What does he do? See if you follow the story. What does he do? Yes, acute senses, so that allowed us to give them, train them in acute sensory, inner and outer senses, okay? Second noble brother opens the earth. That allowed us to look at the multiple levels and layers of Albania, and even draw these layers, so that people say, oh, I never knew my land contained so much sensory richness. They drew the great crags and peaks of Albania, the sensory, the psychological level. What is it? Oh, we are welcoming, we are the greatest hosts in history, and they talked about our women are stronger than any other women in the world, which was actually true, and they went on, and then mythically, what is their story? Well, they think they were Homer, this is the place of great bards and of great storytelling. Spiritually, we have Mother Teresa, because of course she was Albanian, Anyway, they drew it, they saw it within themselves. I had them go through the levels, sensory, psychological, mythic, spiritual, open up these great levels in themselves. And then, of course, the third noble brother, who was able to abstract the great essence of being the princess, that allowed us to look at the entelechy of themselves and the culture. What is the entelechy? Well, it's the entelechy of an acorn to be an oak tree. It's the entelechy of a baby to be a grown-up human being. It is the dynamic, purposive self. It is the essence self. It is the entelechy of you and me to be God knows who or what, but it is there. And so I gave them processes to actually get in touch with entelechy, to feel the beauty, the acknowledgement, the cherishing, the nurturing, the deep, deep acknowledgement that the entelechy feels for you, and you for the entelechy, to start that great friendship. And then what is the entelechy of Albania? What is the entelechy of America? And people would actually play and be the essence of these countries, you see, and to know what is the higher story for this country. And then, of course, the hurling of the shoe that allowed us to look at the great shadows. So we looked at the great shadows of self and society, and ways of looking at shadows in such a way that one does not become bonded to one's shadow, but sees how the shadow is often the protective covering for your highest and finest quality, you see. And then, of course, the building of the castle, and that allowed us to build whole new structures of possibility with people helping other people in their projects. And it's a whole thing I do called the trim tab, where a person comes forward and says, I have this project to create a house for Hispanic women where there is none one, where they can really share their culture, share their ideas, have daycare. And people come forward, well, I speak Spanish and I'm also a psychologist, I will join you. Somebody else says, I will help you market the materials, I'm a graphic artist. Somebody else comes forward, he says, I know the perfect place and I can get it rent-free. And everybody holds on to everybody, you know, so that you finally have this incredible network of co-workers. And we've done this process 60 times so far, and it has never failed. Huge projects then are created through this trim tab, the building of the castle of new possibilities. And we created one there. That was the first time we ever did it. And it has resulted in a whole new school system throughout Albania. Just starting simply. It's a powerful project. And then finally you have, or nearly finally, you have focus, intention, the marksman, who was able to shoot. And that gave us a sense of how do you build up sustainable energy, focus, intentionality, so that you are galvanized to really complete and deepen your project. And then seventh, the brother who catches it, catches the princess, that allowed us to really look at ongoing the plans for the new culture, the emergence of the new order. What does it look like? What is the lure of becoming? Some of you may know that as a young girl, between my 14th and 17th year, on many Tuesdays and Thursdays, I met with an old man who lived across the street from me. And he kept talking about, oh Jean, the people of your time, they will be taking the tiller of the world, but they cannot go directly. You have to touch every culture, every people. You must have the lure of becoming of what the world can be. I called him Mr. Teilhard. He turned out, as I only found out years later, to be Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who lived across the street from me. Well, that's who I was walking with. The lure of becoming. And it's so important in this world today. One of the things I'm doing now is I'm creating all these, what I call them, think and do tanks. Because they're not tanks, they're much more organic. But they are like think and do gardens of people on every major issue, and as they deepen into a deep sense that they receive from the great contemplative parts of themselves, and together they begin to weave what did agriculture look like, governance, ecology, education, and then they begin to share it, and we begin to map a world that really can work. We need that lure of becoming. So that gives you just a brief idea. In different cultures, I'll do different things. For example, I found out in the Eastern Caribbean, they didn't really have a full story. But they had something that they were so passionate about, cricket. So I learned how to play cricket. And we did the whole seminar in terms of the metaphors of playing cricket. And it really worked, you know. But we always find the cultural story that will work for each area. Now, so the social artist is a humorist, a fool, a comedian. He can break out of the usual projections and create a world of the absurd. Now this for me is very easy as the daughter of the man who wrote the joke, who's on first? Actually, I think it was my father and two Jewish guys, but that's the way it went. And my father was a comedian. And so when I die and they shake out my head, they're just going to find thousands of jokes. But you find jokes for every culture. Some cultures, they're pretty raunchy, so you have to figure out how to tone them down. But you always break out of that. But you also create opportunities for social theater, art, and celebration, and drama, and deep expression, theatrically or musically, celebrationally, of the society that you want. One of them you may know about that came out of our work. It was called Swamp Gravy. It's down in Georgia. Have anyone ever seen it? Yeah, that's us. Yeah, that came out of our work. Swamp Gravy it was a little town in Georgia. What is the name? Colca. Yeah, Colca. And they started years ago, and they were having some very real issues between the black and white populations, among other things. And so we got them, they got them together, and they began to sing and dance their story. And now it's been going on 2 or 3 times a year, and now they travel all over the world, and the Kennedy Center, and they have spawned social theater everywhere. It's had the most tremendous effect on the whole society. Social theater, oh my, it really works. Social artist is a kind of healer. Now, healing involves the mystery of change, of transformation, of the incredibly fluid nature of our body, our mind, our psyche, and by extension, I believe, that's what I see, of our societies and culture. Now, clearly, friends, we live in a world that is absolutely ripe for healing. And this is ultimately what motivates the social artist to take initiatives. We're built for healing. We are built for healing. But for me, the critical issue here, the critical issue, is to whether we regard healing as redemptive or creative. Redemptive or creative. Salvational or evolutional. Because so much of popular religion, the parts that are meted out to the folks, are essentially redemptive in their philosophies and their liturgies. One is always trying to fix the old Adam, or if one cannot, then one assures one's followers of ultimate fixing on another plane after death. In our traditional medical technology and healing practice, the emphasis is almost entirely on the redemptive, preemptive strikes. Redemptive, You take on all manner of extreme measures to fix what you think is the fallen state. I sometimes think that current leadership of our country seems to be almost exclusively in the redemptivist mode. But the evolutional state works on an entirely different basis for life and for healing. There is somewhere to go. There's something to become. Even illness contains within itself the notion of deconstruction leading to a higher reconstruction, chaos leading to cosmos. Healing is holing, W-H-O-L. The move from a limited condition felt in a most painful way through a process leading to the creation on a new level of a higher order of mind, emotion, and physical being. Something changes. The wounds in the body or of the society are experienced as doorways to a higher consciousness and more evolved forms. Now, the social artist is also one who respects absolutely the uniqueness of every person, who looks upon the other with wonder and astonishment, and who helps people to ignite themselves and never takes credit for the ignition. Or otherwise people fall into old dependency models and they fall asleep. Because the really good social artist, healer, is an evocateur who shows people how to access their own inner wisdom and knowledge. It's a form of healing that moves us beyond the polarities of left versus right, us against them, and promotes cooperation, understanding, networks of mutual aid. The social artist understands the nature of timing and knowing that when not to be a social artist, to let things lie follow, but also to know that we are in another time. In one of my books, Jump Time, we're in a time of rapid acceleration, where all kinds of things can happen that could not have happened before in human history. and that this particular time is calling forth in us skills and initiatives who in more quiet conditions would be tending to business as usual. I mean, friends, really, how many of you have felt called, drawn forth, evoked, unsettled, shot through by the proverbial cannon of our times? You know? The social artist is one who encourages hope and an attitude of wonder and astonishment before what can be, the lure of becoming. Thus we come to treat the problems and scarcities before us as opportunities to clarify what is really important. And we take a lesson from the Iroquois people. I wrote a whole book for Quest about it called Manual of the Peacemaker, about the Iroquois, who before the council meetings, they speak their praise and gratitude for everything. Oh, hi, 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 which means hail. Hi, 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 hail to the new corn, hail to the new peas, hail to the babies, hail to the grandmas, hail to the grandpa, hail to the aspen, hail to the bird, hail to the oak trees, hail to the dreaming. And they sing it all. You know, I mean, think how different your local school board meeting would be if it began with gratitude for the community's blessings and hopeful declarations rather than partisanship, discouragement, resentment. Hope, singing, gratitude gives energy and motivation. It avails the human mind of its finest qualities. I once asked Hillary Clinton, Hillary, how in the world can you stand your life? How can you stand your life? I mean, it's really awful what I saw there. I mean, she got trashed, I'd say hour by hour. You know, these brown envelopes would come and they'd be filled with horrible things. And I said, how do you stand your life? How come you're not dead? I mean, I really couldn't feel it because most of us would just have dissolved in agony over what this woman had to face on a daily basis. And this is before it really got bad. This is, what, 95, 96. And she said, well, Jean, I practice gratitude. I think of all the people and things that I am so grateful for, and I just repeat these to myself all the time. And that's how I'm able to stand my life. You know? Oh, the social artist leader is one who participates in the art of new creation. Herein one becomes diaphanous to quantum mind, to the great spiritual depths of which one is a part. Here is the mystery itself as an interface between engagement with external realities and the embrace of the inner journey. And this is a kind of contemplative leadership. It is a kind of a vital synergy between inner and outer realities necessary to transform organizations, institutions, paths of possibility, as well as visionary endeavors. And in so doing, to unleash the human spirit of those who might compose the institutions or endeavor for those who serve. It's an activity of extraordinary balance, attention, in repose. It's a space that you enter into where the sacred emerges and the local self disappears. It's a space of exquisite silence and extraordinary service. It's a space wherein the fusing and blending of silence and service. And I really believe that in such a state, you have access to the creative, world-making patterns of the universe. And I believe it is a place, too, where your local entelechy meets the entelechy of a potential new time, one that gives the details of evolution for both person and for society. Now, all of this, friends, all of this requires a movement toward what I call politeia. Politeia is a Greek word which is much juicier than the politics which derives from it. Politeia is civic society carried to its utmost. It implies that all free citizens are actively involved in creating and maintaining their community, empowering each other, to further their common social agenda. In our absolutely unique time, I mean, especially, it requires the plumbing of our emotional depths, the manifesting of our mind's best thinking, and above all, the courage to follow through, as faith, hope, and love are to religion, so politeia is to politics. So ultimately, I really believe that there is a basic unity of human purpose which acts as a prime motivator in our present human life. And without these qualities, survival is unlikely as far as things look today. So what all of this is pointing to, and the very fact that somebody as odd as myself is embraced and welcomed in all these cultures, tells you something. Oh, occasionally you're going to get caught, you know. By the way, I did not download Mrs. Roosevelt from the Cosmos for Hillary Clinton. That never happened. That was a made-up story by the press, but you see the effect it had, you know, because they were looking for something. You know, that a wild card like me, and wild cards like a lot of you Morrises out there, you know, this is the time when you can get away with it. You really can. Because we are in the most radical change in our collective and individual consciousness that the world has ever known. We need new purpose. Each one of you, friends, has a piece of the puzzle. Each and every one of you has an awareness of what is possible. A world where energy is no longer stuck, where people are heard, where helplessness and victimhood have disappeared, where constructive solutions are possible, where human nature shines with spirit, and where nature's soul becomes re-enchanted with wonder. So friends, truly, truly, we are at that stage where the real work of humanity takes a new step forward. This is the time and place where we partner creation in the recreation of ourselves, in the restoration of the biosphere, in the assuming of a new kind of culture, what I might call a culture of kindness, where we live each day and daily life in such a way as to be reconnected and charged and intelligenced by the source of our reality, so as to become liberated as to our inventiveness and engaged in the world in our task. Because now there is a quickening, yes, an almost desperate sense of need for this possible human in every one of us to help create the possible society and the possible world if we are to survive our own personal and planetary odyssey and come safely home to the sanctuary of the soul, our soul and the world's soul. And the great poem by Christopher Fry that I just referred a few lines to, that I believe says it so pungently and potently. The human heart can go to the lengths of God. Dark and cold we may be, but this is no winter now. The frozen misery of centuries cracks, breaks, begins. The thunder is the thunder, the flood, the flow, the upstart spring. Oh, thank God our time is now. When wrong comes up to meet us everywhere, never to leave us till we take the longest stride of soul folk ever took. Affairs are now soul-sized. The enterprise is exploration into God. What are you making for? It takes so many thousand years to wake. But will you wake? For pity's sake.